Hello, welcome to the Community of Inquiry Workshop. Today is Saturday, January 14th, and my name is Brittany Keese, and I'm going to be talking about e-learning in the 21st century and the Community of Inquiry framework. And I know I have a lot of mathematics and e-learning teachers here today that are interested in learning about how to include that in their classes. So let's go ahead and get started. If you're just coming into class, please lower your virtual hand, which is off to the left side of the screen. It's got a little hand and it has a 1 next to it when you first come into the classroom. So make sure you click that hand icon to get rid of that so I know that you're here, but if you have a question, that's how you will signal that you have a question. The second thing you're going to do when you first come into the classroom is you're going to do your setup checks, just like I did when I first came in. You're going to do your setup checks, which at the top left of the screen you'll see audio and video. There is a microphone with a little gear next to it that's red, and that is your audio setup wizard where you will check your hearing and your microphone so that you're able to ask me a question. Now I've already checked to see that you can follow my slides, which you are able to do, so I know that that's able. Take a pause right now, and if you need to, go ahead and set up your audio setup wizard, okay? So pause if you need to do that for my virtual listeners. Okay, and once you've done that, I want you to remove all distractions and get ready for class. So if you have a cell phone, turn it off, put it in the desk drawer. If you have your door open to your office, close it, put a sign on it. Say you're going to be busy for the next 15 minutes. I want your undivided attention so that we can have better learning experience here today, okay? And free your mind, okay? Open space. Okay, so today, we're going to start with our trigger phase, which I'm going to explain a little bit more about that here in a second. Our learning objectives for this workshop. After participating in this online course, participants will be able to describe each part of practical inquiry and how they're used in the educational setting, summarize the different presences of community of inquiry and how they work interdependently, explain an e-learning environment and the concept of a community of inquiry. Okay, and the first objective we're actually already beginning. Practical inquiry, the first portion of practical inquiry is the trigger phase. Let's get started with the trigger phase. That's the thing that pulls you in and gets you started, the hook and hold. How many of you have ever seen or given this look in a face-to-face class? And I'm going to go ahead and circle this look right here because this is the important part. Right there, this face. I myself am guilty of giving this face to a professor or to my teacher. Some of the classes that were not so engaging, okay? And you don't have to tell me. You don't have to write it in the chat. We don't want to embarrass anybody. But we are all guilty of some point or another or being that teacher that's not had the most interesting class. We've all done it. The problem with e-learning is we are not always able to see our audience to know whether we are being engaging. And that's a problem we need to overcome. And we're going to look at that today. So what is e-learning and how is it changing education and the world as we know it? So I want you to go ahead down in the chat, off to the bottom left, there's a little bar there for you to write. What is e-learning? What do you think e-learning is? What do you know already? I mean, right now you're a part of e-learning. You are being a part of e-learning right now. So I'm going to give a little information about it, and I'm also going to show a video, but I want you to write about it. So take a second, pause the video for my virtual learners, pause the video, and write in the chat. So e-learning has come about through the development of the computer and through the internet. It's mediated through electronic media classes that meet synchronously, so they happen at the same time. So they meet at the same time, or asynchronously, which occur regardless of time or space. So they're computer conferencing or blended learning, all right? And I'm going to show you a video. It gives you a little bit more information about e-learning, which we have been learning about in our book, E-Learning in the 21st Century by Randy Garrison. And if you can't watch that, here it is in your chat. video. I did post it down in the chat in the bottom left, a link. So if you need to watch that, pause the recording right now, take a second to watch the e-learning video just to give a little background about e-learning and its contributions to society. All right, and you know, it's aided in teaching and learning approaches for sure. Right now, this would not be possible, and it's a wonderful thing. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that now. But there are challenges. So what are 5 challenges? I would like you to list those on a piece of paper. You don't have to list those in the chat. Keep them to yourself. What are 5 challenges either you've experienced or foresee as a potential learning barrier? Take a second, pause the recording for my virtual learners, and just think about what could be a challenge that you are facing if you're teaching class. Okay, take a second. And just hold on to those because we're going to come back to that here towards the end of the lesson once we've learned a little bit more about how to tackle them. All right, and the big question is, what are some ways we can make online math courses more interactive using the Community of Inquiry framework? Math online. I myself have taken a math course online, and it was not the most interesting thing, the way that it was created for that purpose. We were just doing math problems online, not having any interaction. Well, that's not necessarily the best way to learn, not even in a face-to-face class, just doing problems over and over again. So we're going to look at how we can make that online learning even better using Community of Inquiry framework. Okay, so I want you to think about that. What are some ways? So, exploration phase in my practical inquiry theory. Okay, that's what we're looking at. List ways in which you learn something new. Anyway, list it in the chat. Write them in the bottom left corner. What are some ways in which you learn something new? Take a second, pause the recording, okay? Virtual learners, pause the recording. All right, we never truly learn on our own. It's an illusion. In reality, we are directly influenced and unavoidably so by experiences, good or bad, first or second-hand communication with others. So if you're looking at the picture on the screen right now, the older brother off to the right is teaching the younger brother how to read. They're collaborating, they're learning from each other, they're making meaning. So John Dewey first introduced the idea of learning through interaction. This was a constructivism idea. Meaning is constructed and generated from new and prior knowledge. So they're sharing thoughts and ideas, and it allowed for collaboration. It comes back to the idea you never truly learn something on your own. So that's kind of what we're looking at here when we're coming into a community of inquiry. So that's where I'm going to move on here. So ways in which you learn something new. We're going to discuss that a little bit more as well. Community of inquiry. In a community of inquiry, students build off one another's ideas, challenge, and support, seek to assist in greater learning. So they collaborate learning within a community, and it leads to a community of inquiry. They gain deeper understanding. They share information through the internet, which has allowed for greater understanding and communication. Before the internet, communication was scarce. Thinking and learning collaboratively has been essential to the evolution of human intelligence. We are social by nature. So it is our instinct to share knowledge. We have a group mentality, a team mentality. We want to strive for a common goal. So we're there to support each other. It is more satisfying for us and more effective to learn collaboratively because the normal functioning of the brain is to socialize. So community of inquiry really fosters the idea into an educational framework. So the community of inquiry presents an environment for students to listen to one another, present ideas, build off of past experiences of classmates, challenge each other while respecting each other's opinions. It's really that difference between being actively engaged and invested versus just listening, where that girl in one of my first couple slides was just listening, or maybe not even listening at all. But where now in a community of inquiry, we're being actively engaged in our own learning. Okay? So there are 3 main ingredients to community of inquiry. you've got social, cognitive, and teacher presence. So I want you right now on your own, and you don't need to write this down, but I want you to pause the recording, and I want you to think about social. What comes to mind when you think of social within a classroom? What comes to mind with social? And I want you to think about cognitive. What comes to mind when you think of cognitive when it comes to education in a classroom? And finally, teacher. What comes to mind when you think of teacher presence in a classroom? Okay? Pause the recording. Think about those three things. Those are the big three. And we're going to come back, and I'm going to discuss them. So the first presence of a community inquiry model is social. This is the main one. This is the first one that starts out because it's by human nature, we are driven by social interaction. So this is the communication portion. The ability to connect, to create relationships, and to feel safe to communicate openly in an environment free of criticism. So this is great. This is how we want to feel in an environment where we feel free to open up and express ourselves, to generate new ideas and bounce ideas off of one another. The difficult part of having presence with an e-learning environment is sometimes we have those asynchronous e-learning experiences where we have classmates that are across the world. We're meeting at different times. We're not able to communicate instantaneously. So it's hard to keep that presence, and we have to maintain it because we're not feeling that instant interaction. We've got to wait on them to respond because it's because we're not talking directly. So we have to try and maintain that presence and really continue that presence. And that's where all three of our presences really have to connect, which I'm going to explain here once I've got all three of them together. Okay? So social is the communication portion, the ability to connect. Okay? So think back to what you thought about with social. Does that really sum up what you thought? More than likely it did. That is pretty standard for social, okay? Next, cognitive presence. This is your critical reflection based on collaboration and discourse, which allows for higher order thinking. It allows for either confirmation of what you already thought or reconstruction of meaning based on others' ideas or others' what they gave you. So this is outlined by the practical inquiry model, which was the generic structure. This is your time to interact with one another. So based on the social presence, now you've got your cognitive presence, which allows you to critically think and reflect and collaborate with one another and to gain new meaning, reconstruct, and evaluate what you already know. So think back to what you thought about cognitive. Does that make sense for what you thought of cognitive? Does it relate? Okay. Teacher presence. Teacher presence, and I'm going to underline this because this is the important part. Okay. The purpose of a teacher is to design. Get my pen out. Design, facilitate, focus, and maintain engagement of learners, okay? So the emphasis is on teaching, not so much the teacher being there as teaching, okay? This is the leadership piece. The facilitator drives the focus and design. The teacher informs and makes productive the whole group. This leads towards the intended outcomes by maintaining a balance of presences. So the teacher maintains balance. So the social presence may not always, that's where they're making sure that the social presence stays in contact, that it's maintained, that the learners are engaged no matter where they're at. So all three of the presences have got to be in balance. And a teacher presence is essential to have all of those because you've got to have all of them balanced equally, but the presence of the teacher needs to facilitate. It's not so much emphasis on the teacher as much as the teaching has to be there. All right. So that's a little bit about the community of inquiry model and how they're all related, all pieces. So this is the integration portion of our practical inquiry model. How are we going to integrate that into our own e-learning setting? So based on the community of inquiry, what would be some ways to overcome challenges of e-learning in mathematics? So I want you to think back or pull out that list from earlier, those 5 challenges that you had for e-learning in mathematics, and I want you now, based on the community of inquiry model, what can we do Or what can you do in your e-learning environment to help overcome those? What are some things you can do? And I want you to pause the recording right now and come up with some ideas, and maybe we can brainstorm if you have some problems or issues. If you can't think of an idea, maybe hop over on the chat, type in, I don't know about this challenge. Do you have any ideas? This would be a good time to collaborate, okay? Resolution phase of my practical inquiry model. So in summary, e-learning is fostering a community of learners with a shared interest in advancing intelligence. We right now are an e-learning environment. We are a community right now trying to advance our intelligence on how to further our e-learning practices, okay? So that's what we're trying to do. And Randy Garrison has a great book, E-Learning in the 21st Century, which is where I've gained all of my text and information from today. So in my references, that's my first reference, and the second reference was the video that we watched today about e-learning and the practices for that. So thank you all so much. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat or go ahead and email me. And all of you have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me.